Hello and welcome back to From the BON. This is a debrief of Burnley's 3-1 defeat at Brentford on Saturday. I'm Simon Evans. With me is Paul Woodhouse and two guests with us today. Julian Jordan, the voice of reason, is back with us again. And we have a special guest as well, making his debut on this show. He's somebody you may recognise from his fame in the TV world. Yes, that's right. It's Mastermind's Tony Dawber who forced John Humphrey to ask questions about Jimmy Mack.
Indeed, yeah. I did indeed, yeah. Came second in the episode. I think there's about 5 or 6 people been on Mastermind over the years with Burnley as a specialist subject.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I got about 15 out of 18 and then set off at a great pace on the general knowledge. Then the wheels came off and I had to settle for the bridesmaid, really, a second place on the episode, so I didn't qualify. But yeah, still a good experience.
That's a neat segue, that, Tony, talking about the wheels coming off, given what we're about to get into.
That's what I was queuing up. Yeah.
Yeah, so both Tony and Julian were down in Brentford yesterday, and I contacted them both as they were driving back last night. Woody obviously watching the game over here in the States, as I did. Tony, I mean, on our rapid reaction yesterday, Darren Bentley was saying that fundamentally the team just aren't good enough for the Premier League. Would you share that assessment at that stage, or is that harsh?
Yeah, I think that's harsh. I wouldn't quite share that, I don't think, because I've just been looking today when I got back, just been looking at some of the squads we had in previous years. And I was just giving it some thought, and you'll probably remember, that infamous game against Man City when I think we were 3-0 down in about 5 minutes, and then we were 5-0 down after about 20-25 minutes on the turf a few years back. And we started out against the star-studded City, who were a really good side then, still are, obviously. But I think we started with Kevin McDonald and Chris McCann in midfield. And I don't think Kevin McDonald was really fit. Wasn't that the game where he finished up in the 1-1 club in the after half time or something? But then I'm looking.
You can't have a Kevin McDonald story that doesn't involve that one at some stage.
Yeah. And I looked at some of the midfields that we had under the Dash era, when we had people like Dean Marney and George Boyd, who were kind of workhorses, really. And I'm looking at the midfield we had yesterday. I mean, all right, Big Les didn't start, which I thought was a mistake. But I think the quality, and I spoke to a few people yesterday before the game, and I think the general squad, certainly in midfield anyway, the quality of the squad is as good as any we've had while we've been in the Premier League era. So I think it's really harsh to say that we're not good enough for the Premier League. You can pick holes in the strike force because it's a really understrength strike force, and that's due to recruitment as much as anything. And if you look at the defence, there's faults in the defence, and I think while Dubravka's done well, he probably wouldn't be compared to Tom Heaton at his peak. But the midfield, I think, is excellent, and I think it is harsh. I think we do have the quality there. Much though I do like Scott Parker, and I think he's got a lot of credit from last year. I still wonder whether he's just not quite hit the formula this year with the players that we've got. The key to the Sean Dyche era of our success was a settled team, wasn't it? And everybody knowing the role, everybody knowing where everybody else was. And somebody mentioned that about Crystal Palace earlier on. They're a well-drilled side who everybody knows where they are. Well, I don't think this side does, and certainly yesterday it didn't seem to do. There were players who were marginally out of position, perhaps a lot out of position, some of them. And I just think that he hasn't quite set things up right. Whether he's still experimenting, I'm not sure. But I've still got faith that there's the quality there for us to stay up. But the way that we played yesterday, it created a lot of concern, I have to say. Yeah, I didn't think we competed. Brentford were nothing really to be scared of. They didn't create that much. They did. But I just think that we were disappointing yesterday, and we looked a bit like, the old square pegs thing, really. We just didn't look like we were blending. We never got on top for any period, did we, really?
Yeah. Julian, would you concur with that sort of assessment on the not being good enough aspect first?
broadly, I would, yeah. I think I heard the debrief and I heard Daz's comments, and I generally find myself agreeing with things that both Daz and Chris say pretty often. And I sort of I vacillate between thinking he's being absolutely realistic with his assessment that we're not good enough, and then sometimes thinking he's a little bit harsh. And just listening to Tony's comments there, I mean, the midfielders that you cite in terms of the quality we've got now versus that season, the split season between Coyle and Lowe's, and who was it in midfield? McCann and Kevin McDonald, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I take your point totally in terms of midfield. However, if you look at the front end of the team, we do not pose much of a goal threat, and that same side back then that maybe had a weak central midfield, we did have goal scorers in it. We had Patterson, we had Fletcher, we had Thompson. So that there's some aspects of that side which did look sort of weak in terms of personnel, but it did have provision in other areas that we lack. Now, I actually think Brentford are a pretty poor team, and we just happened to be worse than them yesterday. But I think there is a key difference, and I think part of it applies tactically, but part of it is a bit more structural and a bit more worrying, because I think that they've managed their circumstances brilliantly over the last few seasons, and it strikes me that they have a real strategy in terms of player recruitment. They have a way they want to play, and they have a model type of player. So if you take the front end of their team, Thiago yesterday, fantastic. Now, in terms of his build and the way he plays, he looks just like several of their recent players. They're stocky.
Mbemo, yeah, the guy.
Power and pace. Mbemo, the players out of the same mould. And it's like, we don't seem to have that sort of strategic approach in terms of recruitment. So we end up getting a Breuer in at the end of the window. Now, he may prove to be brilliant at some future point, but we're not seeing it now. So I sometimes think Daz might be being a bit harsh, but when you look at it in terms of what you said, Tony, I think there are elements of the team where we light years ahead of where we once were, albeit not having that attacking element. I think where Daz is concerned, I want to disagree with him, but rationally, I feel like he's right. But as a football supporter, you don't want to be entirely rational. You want to live in hope at some point. And most of us succeed most of the time, it has to be said. But you want to see you want to see your team get promoted, and then you want to live in hope that they can, get over the line and finish 17th or better. And I think one of the really disappointing things about yesterday, I'm sure we'll get into more detail about it, was yesterday was the day when I felt like Daz's realism kicked in for me, and I thought, yeah, we're not good enough. And I'm not saying the fat lady's singing yet, but yesterday felt like a day when she was clearing her throat.
Clearing her throat, and your inner Daz started to assert itself. Yeah,
I'm afraid.
I think just one point about yesterday, Simon, I'd just like to make in defence of Parker. I think that early booking for Hannibal, I mean, when I looked at it, it didn't look to be as outrageous a dive as I've seen this by a lot of other players this season. But when Hannibal gets a yellow card, he's not the same player because of the way he plays. And I think that blew a hole in Parker's game plan quite early on. That's just a sort of in Parker's, in defence of Parker for yesterday, really. I think he got it wrong a lot of ways yesterday, but just in defence of him, I think that early booking for Hannibal was a big blow, really.
It is, when that Hannibal's one of the big changes you've made to your side, so you're obviously hoping to get something out of him, and then suddenly he's defanged, as it were, by that decision, isn't it?
Yeah. I think Parker's thinking was to Hannibal. He comes in, he winds people up, he makes things happen, and he might, with him sort of trying to close him, it might have created a bit more space for Joanna and for Foster on the other side. But once he was booked, he disappeared a little bit, and that was that, really. And we retreated, and I thought we were really poor apart from, bizarrely, that 3 or 4 minute spell after the penalty. That was the only time we really give it a go.
Yeah, we came alive then, didn't we? Woody, just to finish off the sort of, assessment of that, because it is a big statement, isn't it, to say we're not good enough at this stage, like a third of the way into the season or whatever it is, to say we're not good enough. But I can see arguments pro and against what Daz is saying there. Where do you sit on it?
I mean, well, we started the season, didn't we? And we thought that we were never going to be anywhere near. And we've seen performances. Chelsea last week, there was a big chunk of that game where we competed, where we looked good enough. Yesterday we were. I think the most worrying thing about yesterday was how poor we were, and also the constant mistakes that we see, the likes of Steve or Walker, whatever, there's at least 2 or 3, blatant, horrible bits of defending or misplaced passes. Yesterday, we were just sloppy. And just for us to be able to compete, we've got to be at his very, very top of his game. And for the likes of Brentford, all they had to do was shift up another gear. The likes of Katara, Downsgard, Thiago's the second top leading scorer after Haaland, isn't he? But they've got that extra little bit of pace, and we don't have that extra either on the bench or on the team. It's pretty much, can we hold on in there, get something out of nothing, and see what comes of it. And yesterday it just all fell to pieces, didn't it? And so it's one of those, and you see a performance like yesterday's, and that's when the realism kicks in, and you can see a few more performances such as that coming down the pike. So it's a little bit worrying, but it's also kind of expected. So,
it is hard work, going back to what Julian was saying about the sort of wanting to have the whole. It is hard work when every season seems to be this, this yo-yo process is quite tiring on supporters.
It's exhausting.
Yeah,
it's exhausting. It really is.
Julian, where do you think? I mean, I think most of us would agree that if there's a weak part of the thirds in the team, it's probably the attacking third. But when you looked at it yesterday, where would you say that Parker got it wrong? Because a lot of people say he got it wrong yesterday. Where would you say tactically the setup was not right?
Well, I wouldn't even say it was that so much. I think the first half, I was reasonably happy at half time, even though the first thing I said when the whistle blew, I said to my son, that wasn't exactly a great advert for the supposedly best league in the world. It was pretty dull stuff. But for me, I think it's almost like there's a portion of connective tissue missing in the team. What you saw with Brentford yesterday was when they shift the ball and they get into the final third, they will generally get to a point where they create an opportunity. And good sides do that. What you find with us is we seem to get that far and we just don't have that ability to quite unlock things. So we get that far up the pitch and then it starts to go sideways and backwards. And by which time your opponents, they've got everybody back behind the ball. The team's in a really good defensive shape, and trying to break them down is really difficult. And what then tends to happen is you at some point you lose possession. It's just that key to unlocking that final third and making that good approach play count in a way that then generates an opportunity. I think that's where we really seem to be lacking. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, we're not seeing much of our Marcus Edwards this season, and he would seem to be one of the players that might have the ability to do that. But is he too lightweight for the Premier League? I don't know.
Tony?
Well, he doesn't track back. That's what people say, that, don't they? That's what, while Anthony does. He's one of the most skillful players, if not the most skillful player in the squad. But the accusation is that he's too lightweight and doesn't track back, and saying you can't afford to carry players. But we work at him. In Chuana was just anonymous yesterday, wasn't he? And I agree with you. We don't have much, and that does. Even though, as I say, I think we've got a decent quality midfield. It puts pressure on the midfield because we haven't really got a threat. When they do produce an opening, there's no options for them really. I think Fleming's a good player. I like Fleming. He reminds me of Goodmanson a bit. He's tidy. He's got a good footballing brain. He responds well under pressure, and I think he's a decent player. But Chuana showed nothing. Foster,
just on that, Tony, the one thing I would say in Chuana's defence, I think he's a great talent. He's a very raw talent.
Yeah.
But when that problem I just identified, I think when we get to that point where we're trying to get into the final third and create a chance, he's one player who is never reluctant to have a pop. He will get his shot off. He'll try to get his shot off. And I think, we seem to get into half decent positions, then the ball gets played inside or backwards. And, so I'd defend him on that basis. I'm not disagreeing with you about his performance yesterday. I think he was anonymous, but I think that sort of justified his selection, thinking he might be the key to opening him up a bit and get a shot off.
Yeah, and I'd just like to make another couple of points about the strike force. Foster, firstly, he was playing a bit wide yesterday, wasn't he? He was drifting about, but he was wide mostly. I don't think that's it. I think he's better down the middle, where he's a quite direct player. He's better down the middle. But I just, every time I see Foster, I just think back to that game against Sunderland early in the season. They disallowed goal. Foster's an old-style, bustling, he bustles his way through, kind of thing. Now in the Premier League, if you bustle your way past the defender, the defender will be coached and he'll know what to do. He'll go down. Then there'll be, if Foster scores, there'll be VAR. As happened against them, there'll be VAR. VAR will find a touch and it'll be disallowed. And I think that sort of nullifies Foster's threat a little bit. You know, he's that bustling type of player, which he could get away with in the Championship. I mean, he to be honest,
basically, you're not allowed to be a bustling centre forward in the Premier League anymore.
No. Bizarrely, he has been more effective in the Premier League than the Championship, hasn't he, in his time with Burnley? But he's. I just thought I'd make that point in Foster's defence that it nullifies him a bit. And just one point about Brozier, Chelsea took him on when he wasn't. He was only a kid. I think he was born somewhere around sort of Hounslow, when he's not far from Chelsea. Chelsea must have seen something. Everton saw something to take him. We've seen something. He can't be as bad as he's shown so far. He just can't be. There must be something there.
He can't.
There's got to be something that, he's going to...
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
He's, we've had players like that in the past. I mean, Danny Ings was here for 2 years before he was out injured he came for a while, then he was out injured for 18 months. He came back in and he looked, within a few games, he was the business. Robbie Blake as well, when he first came. So there must be something there in Brozier. There must be something there. And it's possible it will never come through while he's at Burnley, but I think,
You might be right, Tony, there, but I think the difficulty we've got is we just don't have the luxury of bedding somebody in for 6 months. You've got a 38-game season.
Yeah.
And you really realise when you're up against it, as we are, how massive 3 points are. When we got those back-to-back wins a few weeks back now, it transformed the way the season looked. I mean, how we could do with that now. But, we need somebody who's going to start firing. I don't know who it's going to be. It doesn't look like Brozier. And as I say, that the prospect of giving him several months to bed in and start performing for us, it might mean that he has a great Championship season next season. But we need something a bit more urgently than that.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying he needs bedding in. I'm just saying that it may be a confidence thing that he gets a goal. It's oft said that for strikers, isn't it? And it shouldn't really be the case for professional strikers. They should be mentally strong enough to be able to get going from the off. But it needs, maybe must. When Foster goes to AFCON, he may be thrust in anyway, and it could be the making of him possibly. But I just think he showed flashes for Albania against England, didn't he? In that brief cameo he did. He went past Bellingham, didn't he? Famously, before he was stretchered off, looking like he was going to be out for 2 years, and it was actually about 6 days. But I've not given up hope on Brozier yet. That's what I'm saying. I think there is a player there somewhere, and maybe when Foster goes and he gets a chance, you can't bet him in, like you say, but needs, maybe must. We're going to have to throw him in and see what happens, I think.
Yeah.
See, I like that. That's like us, going back to my earlier point about returning to the notion of hope, as opposed to the horrible reality we may be facing. I'll take it.
Yeah. No, well, hope's always better than being cynical and thinking that Broyer's going to pull a hamstring when he celebrates that first goal he finally gets for us. But
yeah.
Well, the lad has got a low pain threshold. He showed that against England, and then I think we're at the Chelsea game. He took that challenge in front of the long side, and he writhed around like he'd been shot.
Yeah, his own teammates were telling him to get up and get on with it, weren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Woody, tactically, we've had this debate going on this pod about, and Parker's obviously had a debate in his own head about the 5 at the back or playing the 4. He seems to have now settled on 4. We've had a look at it. To me, and I think the stats will probably back this up, we looked a little bit tighter with 5, which would be logical in some respects. But what do you make of it? Because it's not that yesterday wasn't a great advertisement for that way of playing, was it?
No, and one of the things that was slightly worrying yesterday was like nobody this season really has played those, little cute balls through the middle and kind of cut us on the inside. And they managed to do it quite regularly during the second half yesterday. And between them, Tuanzebe and Steve had an absolute shocker, and that slightly worried me. How sides tend to work us out. All they have to do is up it a little bit, put a little bit more pressure on, find those cute little balls, and then next thing you know, Steve's face planting all over the place, and Tuanzebe can't find a back pass, and it just looks a shambles. And it's a case whereby it doesn't necessarily matter how you set up. If those types of mistakes are creeping in, it doesn't matter whether you set up with a 3, a 5, a 4, or whatever. Solidity is
individual mistakes,
irrelevant.
not a system.
Exactly. And it's that thing like Julian was just saying about that connective tissue. This perennial thing that Parker's got about a number 10 being a midfielder as opposed to being a creator. You know, Hannibal's obviously there for the press yesterday. He runs about, does a hell of a lot. Then all of a sudden, once you start seeing the likes of Qatar, once we start getting pushed back a little bit, you see Hannibal dropping back into the midfield, and then there's nothing to connect again. And, you know, he seems to be, you know, not just risk averse, but chance creation averse. And it's the only thing that I really have a downer on about Parker, is that we don't necessarily go after games. There's not that creative spark there. And with the personnel that we've got, we really, chances are at a premium, and we don't have the luxury of making mistakes.
All right, well, we've ended up onto Parker there. So
Yeah.
before we dive fully into the whole tactics and the Parker side of it, let's just have a quick look at his reaction, or part of his reaction, in his interview with the club channel.
We need to be brutally honest. We need to be really honest in our assessment of things when they're not going well, or we've made crucial mistakes, because that's going to give us an opportunity to survive. On the flip side of that is, what's crucial is in times of adversity, and I judge people fundamentally on adversity, I'm judging my players right now on adversity, is a default position in a human being is to point fingers. Mm-hmm. A default position in a football club is to point fingers. We need to stand together in these moments. These moments are, like I've said, something that we need to prepare for and understand it. And we need to stand united together as a team, and we need to front up constantly. At the end of this season, we'll get judged. At the end of life, when I'm 75, my wife will judge me, my kids will judge me. When the curtain comes down, at this present moment in time, there's a long season ahead of us, and we'll get judged at the end of it. We'll judge internally in between that, but fundamentally we'll stick together. We'll come back. We'll bring everything we can bring, and we will stick together. That is the only way. That is fundamentally the only way. So we're disappointed today, and we're hurting, and I'm sure the fans are as well. Everyone is. But I know that we're a football club and an organisation that we reboot, we dust ourselves off, and we stick together.
He's an emotional guy, isn't there? There's moments there where I thought he were getting, you know, he was about to well up or something. He definitely affects him. And I must admit, I respect and prefer that to some of the reaction we had last time we were in the Premier League, and the manager was like, "Oh, it'll be okay, 4-0, it's fine, you know, we'll move on." You know, he's got some feeling there, hasn't he? But he's asking people not to point fingers, which is, of course, exactly what we do constantly for 40 minutes on every episode of this podcast. But what did you make of that, Tony? Because he's a bit emotional there, wasn't he?
He's that type of guy. Even at the beginning of last season, he was doing his breast beating, you know, with it, tapping the badge and things, wasn't he, when he was walking off? And one thing I thought about Parker, I thought about it yesterday, because I think he does feel even though he's not from Burnley, he feels I remember you said to me many years ago, Simon, there were two types of player who played for Burnley. There were players who played for Burnley, and there were Clarets. The ones who were Clarets feel it more. But I think Parker does feel it. I think he has got involved with the club. But I think he feels the pressure, because at the beginning of last season, if you'd have took 100 Burnley fans over the summer, there's probably not one would have said they wanted Scott Parker. He wouldn't be top of anybody's list of choices, would he? And at the beginning of the season, that last season, I think he knew that. I think he knew he was going to have to win the fans over. So there was always going to be that bit of extra pressure. Company had this aura, of course. Dash was, Dash was a one-off, really. Stan Turner to have the Burnley, sort of mentality as well. But I think Parker, he's an honest, he seems an intelligent sort of guy, and I think he knew that, most of the fans didn't really want him. He wasn't top of anybody's list, so he thought he put that extra bit of pressure on himself. And I have a lot of admiration for him for the way he sort of didn't panic. He patiently built that team last year after the shambles after the first 2 games, that fire sale we had, and then when we went to Sunderland and we played a Carabao Cup style team, and Sunderland won 1-0, thinking they were going to stroll the league, even though they played basically a reserve team. And he slowly and patiently turned things round, didn't he? Now, is he doing that this season? Is he going to slowly turn things round? I don't know whether he's thinking, I'm just a bit worried about this. I think a couple of the lads have mentioned just switching, like you mentioned, switching from 4 to 5 at the back and things. Is he, is his game plan sort of out the window and he's beginning to sort of get a bit worried and throw up plans, rather than stick to his season plan, really?
Julian, what did you make of that interview?
Well, I'd agree with a lot of what Tony said, and I think it's refreshing to see an honest and a pretty emotionally intelligent football manager, and we've certainly got that. So I kind of respect the approach. In terms of interpreting what he actually talked about, there's 2 takes you can get from this, which are kind of contradictory, actually. I think the first one is there's a positive take from that. And when he's talking about pointing fingers being the default in these circumstances when you face an adversity, perhaps what he was actually saying, he was calling for people to stick together and for us to take collective responsibility, whether that's in the squad, whether it's in the club more broadly in the hierarchy, and whether that's getting the supporters to stick with them.
The fans.
And that's so that's fine. There's a more concerning take because you could interpret it quite differently. And what he could have been referring to is that there are people internally who are literally pointing fingers that he's aware of and feels under some pressure. Now, that could be from the hierarchy, from upstairs. It could be that he's alluding to there might be a bit of disunity in the squad. I mean, there may be players who aren't happy. I mean, I mentioned Marcus. I'm not saying I know anything, but Marcus Edwards earlier, you'd have thought he'd have come here expecting game time. He's had very little so far this season. So there's a positive interpretation of what he was saying, and I hope that's what he was implying. But you could interpret that negatively, which is really concerning, because if you are facing adversity, and if he says, unity is the only way to sort of deal with that, and if that's not the circumstances he's working in, then that's a really worrying sign.
I must admit that's exactly what went through my mind after I watched it. I'm like, is it a way of him calling for the fans to stick with him without saying that? Because it looks weak, doesn't it, when you turn around and say, stick with me, we've all got to, I'm calling on the fans to stick by us and all, they give us time. That always looks weak. So he's sort of transmitted that message without saying it. But it did cross my mind as well that, is he mentioning people pointing fingers because some fingers are being pointed? Yeah, it's a good one. Woody, you've been pretty positive about Parker for as long as we've been talking about him. Really, do you are you still? Is the faith still there?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, if you look at when he first came into the club last year, he was very adamant about there were going to be down times as well as up times. He's always been very adamant about the downside of what goes on with regards to football and within a club. And part of me wonders whether on a broader level that he's trying to prove something to himself after, Fulham and Bournemouth, and this is his 3rd effort. And it's like, at what point does he make that step up to become a Premier League manager? And is he thinking, here it goes again? And whether there's a piece of that in the back of his mind. And I must admit, I do feel sorry for him. And I'm not one of these people who thinks Parker out or whatever, because I don't think anybody's going to get a particularly different tune out of this crop of players, whoever comes in. But perfectly damn well that he's probably got a shorter shelf life, because, as Julian said, not too many people really had him as on at the top of their list when he originally came in, and that means that as soon as things start going wrong, they turn against him relatively quickly, don't they?
Yeah, I think you've seen a bit of that online. Some of those people, the knives have come out a little bit too quickly, I think, for him. But they're
just waiting, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's not. in the situation we're in, Tony, like whatever we do in these seasons where basically our goal is to finish above 3 teams, there's going to be some rough patches, aren't there? There's going to be these difficult moments. He's right about that. But what you want to see is some sign of steady improvement in some area or solutions and so on. And sometimes you stumble across things, don't you? You remember that season where, you know, Joe Hart was left out and Heaton came back in, and then Dwight McNeil was given a start. I think it was, just after Christmas, wasn't it? I think in one season. What could that be for us that just clicks some things into place?
I think it's a difficult one, that, Sam, especially for Parker, because Parker is not, you get your sort of strongman leaders like Dyche, obviously, is one. I think Company was probably one by default because of his reputation. Stan was one. You get your Ferguson types who whatever I say goes kind of thing. I remember going to the press conferences at Garthorpe, and this guy said, you know, when Eddie Howe was there before, and he goes, he doesn't look like a strong man sort of thing. But when Dyche came in, if Dyche says it's Tuesday, it's Tuesday. But I think Parker falls into the bracket more of your Eddie Howe, Thomas Frank maybe. He's a thoughtful manager. He obviously thinks deeply about the club and the game and his tactics. But he's not a leader from the front, is he? He's not. He'd never call Scott Parker controversial, would you, or anything like that?
No.
But my point is that it doesn't gives him a little less wiggle room, really, doesn't it? Because he's got to produce something. You know, his way is a patient way of building a side, which Thomas Frank had a chance to do at Brentford in the 3 or 4 years he was there in the Championship. Parker doesn't have that. Parker did brilliantly last season, probably surpassed what he thought he was going to do, really. But now the pressure's on, and as I think the other lads mentioned, you know, he's. I think Woody said he's twice before it's happened, and it with Bournemouth and Fulham, it's blown up in the Premier League, and it is looking a bit like he's got to produce something now. But he's not that type of manager. He's the type of manager who builds gradually rather than makes a master stroke signing or he'll suddenly do a stand turn at those players are never playing for us again, and there'll be a big shake up, and suddenly things will be all right. Parker's not that type of manager. We've got to be patient, and we've just got to hope it falls into place. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic turn. You know, get a draw against Palace, that would be something to build on, wouldn't it? But yeah, it is difficult, Simon. I can't see a dramatic turnaround in form at this point. I don't know if you can. You just can't see one, can you, really?
No, it's hard to feel that. It's hard to feel that there will be, that we go and beat Crystal Palace and then Newcastle. You can see us getting a result against Palace at home, maybe, but then not backing it up at Newcastle. That's just a step too far for this team, I think. Look what they did to Everton yesterday, so it is very difficult. You are hoping that other teams implode as well, and we just keep adding up some points along the way. And then in January, something does happen. And that's been another debate that's been going on, Julian, really, hasn't it? People can point the fingers at Scott Parker, but if our front line and other areas aren't quite up to scratch, and we're talking about not being up to scratch for a team that might finish 15th in the Premier League, we're not talking about being up to scratch in any other way. Should questions be asked about the recruitment team and indeed the ownership of the club when how much they've put into the players? Because we've seen what's happened with Sunderland and other clubs. There are ways to crack this code, aren't there? But
yeah. Sunderland, great case in point. They recruited brilliantly, and they did have a fairly fortunate start in terms of the fixture list throughout them. And I think that allowed them to build a certain degree of momentum. And that certainly wasn't a privilege that we were allowed. We had a horror show start to the season. And I think, go back to my previous comment, you look at the way Brentford recruit, and especially around strikers, you do get the impression they've got a very clear idea. They have a strategic approach. We all hear this stuff that, they do a sort of Moneyball approach. They really sort of work with the data and such like. So I'd imagine they're identifying players well ahead of time that they think they can bring in a reasonable money to. And you'd like to think we're doing that, and apologies to anyone at the club if we are, but you do get the impression that's not quite our approach, and that we just we are fishing in a bigger pond than we used to do. It has to be said, but I think some of the bigger anglers have been there before we got there, so we're left with some of the scraps at the end. I think there's perhaps an element to that, unfortunately. But I have to say, there have been a lot of games this season where we've been very competitive, and they talk about fine margins, and we've just been the wrong side of some of them fine margins a couple of times. When we've looked really decent, actually, and you just think we're not too far. We're far enough away to not be consistently getting results, but we're not too far away from being a genuinely good side who could compete at this level. And I have no idea what it might. Maybe Breuer will materialise into this wonder player come January when the AFCON's on. Who knows? Who knows? I hope so, Tony. I hope so. But something may happen that could be the catalyst, or the keystone that suddenly holds this structure together. But at the moment, we are lacking that. And my worry is, as this continues, they're starting to look a bit shot of confidence. I really got that impression
yesterday.
Yeah, and you know what? It's not just the players; it's the support too. Because I had a bit of a rant to you, Simon, yesterday about Brentford. We can get onto that if you want to in a minute. But it was a soulless place and totally devoid of atmosphere. But when that third goal went in, the Burnley fans who've been doing their best all afternoon to make noise, it just evacuated. I've never seen that before. Some people will leave early, but people were just streaming out as soon as that went in. I had enough, because it was an abject collapse in those last few minutes.
Yeah, no, it's.
Just to throw something in, Simon, that we haven't been mentioned, and I think the supporters are going to start mentioning it, and if this bad run goes on, is the Espanyol factor. Yeah. Do we think that's a distraction, or is it just a mental distraction? Is it distracting resources, or because I think I've heard one or two people mention it. They're more interested, the ownership are more interested in Espanyol because they've got a chance of getting in Europe. They're playing as we speak, I think, aren't they? And if they win, they could go up to 5th, I think. Calio show an unused sub when the podcast started, but I just wonder that's going to come in. That's going to be another factor Parker's going to have to deal with, isn't it? Which is out of his hands. So that's another thing for us to deal with as a small fish battling in a really big pond, aren't we?
This point got raised when we were driving back home yesterday. When we were chatting in the car, that same point got raised about Espanyol, and one of the lads who was with me said, when Pace was doing his interview, and he said, our aspiration has to be that we're going to be a Champions League side at some point. He said, you think he screwed up there and he forgot that he was being interviewed at Burnley? He thought he was talking about it.
The thing about Espanyol is, just from a business point of view, and people say that there's, they could get Espanyol into Champions League. Well, there's 6 now, and they're heading in that direction a bit with the form. So that's probably not going to happen. But maybe it will. But money-wise, he's never going to get the money. They're never going to get the money out of the Spanish league that they would out of the Premier League just because of the broadcast deal. I mean, it just absolutely dwarfs it. When you see those revenue league tables that people like Deloitte put out, Burnley are up there in the top 30 odd in the world, but just because we're in the Premier League. So I'm not sure that necessarily they'll see, Espanyol as their way to the riches, but. It's an interesting one because,
Simon, you follow football in other territories a lot more than I do, but I have actually been to Espanyol. It's a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
In the new stadium?
Yeah, I saw him play Elche. It's a nice stadium. There's a big shopping centre there called Splau, which is it's got Liverpool 1 vibes right adjacent to the ground. And it struck me as a kind of nice modern football ground in that respect. But I think, aren't they filling it now? Because when I saw them, it was a 1-1 draw with Elche, and I think there were 13,000 there. And I remember thinking at the time when we came off the match, me and my son, we were like, we could have played either of those sides and we would batter them. That was the level of quality I thought that I saw there.
Yeah, it's a topic that often comes up. What I see when people start talking about how brilliant Scott McTominay is doing and other players are doing, or now Burnley fans talking about Hutonji being the answer at centre forward because he's had some goals for St. Pauli. Because it sounds a little bit chauvinistic or a bit cliche to go on about how the Premier League is the best league in the world and these other leagues are like farmers' leagues and so on. But there is some truth in that, not that they're farmers' leagues, but that the level in Serie A, La Liga, and the Bundesliga, especially if you go outside of the Champions League, Europa League elite at the top end, and you start looking at clubs at our sort of level, it's nowhere near. So I think it's very hard to judge players. Like Hutanji scoring goals in the Bundesliga, and he didn't look anything like a player in the Championship, did he? I mean, we know we didn't see a massive amount of him. But it is hard to draw those. I remember Chris Smalling when he went from Manchester United and he was playing at Roma, and these United fans started saying, he looks class. There's something wrong at United. He looks, well, he does look class playing against those kind of players, I think. It's. I don't know. Are you concerned about it, though, Tony? You raised it. I'll ask you as well in a minute, Woody.
I am a bit. I'm just trying to reflect what a few of the fans say, because I know what people be thinking when they saw Tuma yesterday. I know I sort of criticised him earlier. And I think we all agree he had a poor game. It wasn't all his fault. It was a collective failure yesterday. But people will be thinking, what if Koleosho was playing in that position? Would it be different? What's Koleosho doing on bench at Espanyol when a lot of the people in that away end, if you'd have had a poll, most of them would have voted for Koleosho to play rather than Chuama yesterday. I think that's me. That's my worry, that this Espanyol thing's becoming a distraction for the board and the fans as well. I don't think for a minute. I think if we played Espanyol, we would beat them. I still think if we played Espanyol tomorrow, we'd probably beat them. And I agree with what you're saying. To generate money from Espanyol are never going to generate the money. If Burnley stay in the Premier League, we'll generate far more money than Espanyol would, finishing 7th or 8th in the Spanish league, in La Liga, wouldn't we? So I just worried about it being a distraction, and because a club like Burnley, we have to be 100% focused. As Julian mentioned before about Brentford, they're fully focused on what they do. They're well run. They focus on recruitment. They focus on recruiting the right type of player. They don't put too much pressure on themselves. They have things lined up for if people, like Thomas Frank went, they had it lined up and stuff. And we have to be fully focused for a club like Burnley and to be able to survive in the Premier League. If we're not, the wheels are going to come off fairly quickly.
I must admit, Woody, there's a side to that Burnley Espanyol thing that I'm curious about your opinion about, which is this social media. We saw it this afternoon where Espanyol put out some sort of, come on lads type pre-game post, and Burnley are commenting underneath, and Burnley's official account is commenting underneath, and there's this sort of attempt, and I think they've been a bit careful with it, because he probably Bobby Ball has been burnt a few times on these kind of things. But I imagine they're being a bit careful with it. But you get the idea that they'd love to sort of play with that thing a bit more. But I went on Classic Football shirts where I buy things like this fine Dinamo Berlin home kit, and I had a look at the Espanyol range. And you could actually get in their clearance sale a few weeks ago an Espanyol shirt which was blue and white halves. So, which I was thinking probably wouldn't look great on JJ Watt next time he's shouting Forza Magico Espanyol. But Woody, what do you think of that side of it? Are we all going to become mates? Are Burnley fans going to be Espanyol fans and vice versa? Or is this going to become, like Tony said, a distraction, or maybe something people hold against the ownership?
We'll find out, in due course as to where money start to go. But, it's once they start, trying to flog us half and half scarves in it, special Christmas offers and shit like that. And it's like, nobody gives a shit about Espanyol. We literally don't give a shit. It's as simple as that. You know what I mean? Don't force us to twin with a football club because Little Al's bought one. You know what I mean? It's
when the deal went through, Twitter was a joy for a couple of days, because the Espanyol fans were absolutely battering Blackburn and going on about horses and all sorts. It's like how they cottoned onto that, I don't know. But yeah, Espanyol fans were giving bastards some real ribbing. It was hilarious.
Oh, well,
I think it was probably a bot swarm.
There's always a silver lining to everything, isn't there? Yeah. Right, last round then, because having two special guests on like this, we'll give them the final word, I think, Woody, yeah? But generally speaking, now, where do you rate your optimism meter on a 1 to 10 on our chances of turning this around a bit and saving the season and staying up?
Myself, 5, about 5 to 5.5, something like that.
Ooh, that 0.5
I would
doing a lot of work there.
I got a really serious blow to that yesterday. I was confident yesterday when we were in beforehand. We went in Kew Cricket Club actually beforehand, and the wicket looks very dodgy. Like it was like the Perth wicket, and I just thought that before, and I was saying I think we're going to get a draw today. I really do. I was really confident because I don't think Brentford, as Julian mentioned, I don't think Brentford are any great shakes. And I thought, we've come out of that tough fixture thing. We've got we've got a better series of fixtures. This could really be a springboard today. I was really unusual for me. My mantra is always I'll take a draw in every Premier League game, pretty much. Except that time we played Sunderland a few years ago when they were that bad, when Andre Gray scored a hat-trick. That was the only time I really predicted us to win. All the time we've been in the Premier League, I'll take a point every time, pretty much. But I was sneakily confident yesterday, and I was really hopeful, and I was really disappointed to driving home last night. I really was. But I'm still not giving up yet. I'm still giving it a 5. I still think Parker his patient approach might come off, and there's a couple of players who might come good, and he'll hit a formula. So let's not write it off yet. But I'm worried.
5 or 5.5?
5 rather than 5.5.
Oh, he's backtracked a
I'm
little bit.
slipping. I'm visibly slipping as we speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm slipping as we speak.
Julian, where are you on that optimism-ometer?
Well, I can't be that optimistic as Tony, I'm afraid. I think after 10 hours driving yesterday, I was so pissed off. And 10 hours in car and a bucket seat, I felt like I'd just been released from Alcatraz. My arse were killing me when I got home. So that coloured my mood somewhat when you texted me, to be honest. I was like really
You did
pissed off.
sound a bit grumpy, to be fair.
And just I'm saying probably 3.5 at the moment. But I like most football fans, I'll fluctuate. It depends on where the wind's blowing. If we get a win on Wednesday night and then a draw at Newcastle, suddenly I'll be optimistic again. But 24 hours on, I still feel very deflated after yesterday. And as I say, earlier, it just felt like that moment in your season where that horrible realization kicks in. It's going to be another one of those years. That's how I felt.
Woody, where are you on that meter?
I tend to be quite sanguine about this because I didn't expect much of this season. In some respects, it's been slightly better, and I think a lot comes down to January. But January could be an absolute shit show if we go out and spunk money on, the likes of more Broyers or folks for 20 million who don't really get much of a look in. Then long term, it looks arguably worse, doesn't it? So I think it comes down to what we actually do in January, whether we want to do anything in January. But overall, I'm still around about 5.
Right.
And it's one of those, isn't it? We win on Wednesday and it goes to a 7. Simple as that. Yeah.
Just one quick point, Sam, before I know we're closing shortly, but I just thinking back to the company season, we had less points then, didn't we? Yeah. Everybody seemed really optimistic. Everybody was still. It was only at Christmas when I was thinking, well, is he going to? We had this almost blind faith that he was going to turn it round because of what he'd done the season before and his reputation. Well, we don't have that under Parker, do we? There isn't, as Woody just mentioned, we started without that expectation, really. But it is, maybe we are being a bit pessimistic because under company, I was in this like fool's paradise up to Christmas thinking, he's going to turn it around, something will happen, he'll pull a rabbit out, so these signs are going to come good. And then it never happened, and he just, he obviously had his eyes on Bayern from in the later part of the season. This season, there isn't that. I suppose that's in our favour. There isn't the expectation. It's almost a free hit, I suppose. But I don't think we do have that confidence that the company seem to be able to transmit to the players. We don't have that. We don't have any swagger or anything, do we? We don't have any period of games where we really do look like we can outclass teams even for short periods. So. I'm not quite as pessimistic as Julian. I was just as annoyed as you, Julian, driving back last night. But I've still got just a little flicker of hope.
I think there is not all our recruitment has been bad. I think Kyle Walker is still a very good right back, notwithstanding that little mistake on what was a very difficult cross to deal with, to be fair. And I think Estev's a good centre-half. And I think our midfield trio have all got qualities in some way, all limited in other ways as well, and maybe don't quite work as a 3 because they've all got similar limitations, really. None of them are particularly creative or can open a defence. I just think if you don't have that threat in front of goal, it affects so much around the rest of the team. The midfield don't get a break. The defence don't get a break in the same way. You're constantly in this sort of siege situation in a game. And if we can bring someone in January, just a crazy signing who just comes in and scores 2 goals, suddenly the whole mood and atmosphere can change and everything can turn around.
We saw that with Cornet. That was exactly that kind of sign, wasn't it?
That kind of thing. Somebody who just gets people, fired up. And even if it's only an illusion for a month and then they fade, we saw it last year with Edwards, really, didn't we? The same sort of thing. So who knows? I'm remaining hopeful. I'm gonna go on the 5.5. I'm gonna pick up that half that you didn't want, sorry. But thanks very much indeed. We've gone longer than we normally do there, but it's been a really good discussion, so fully merited. And it's been great to have you both on, and hopefully we'll have you on again very soon, if not regularly. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. We'll be back later this week, and until then, up the Clarets.